is a nice example of pristine fynbos. It's an area that hasn't been burned for quite a long while. But then on the other side, there's a recent fire that happened down on the other edge there. You can see the white edge over there. That was quite a devastating fire. Fynbos needs to have fires because it helps encourage all the biodiversity, because there's a succession process that would happen here. The dominant plants would disappear, and then all the pioneers would come in, and what we see as these beautiful spring flowers are all pioneer plants, and they're here to re-establish the vegetation. They're opportunistic, so whenever they see a chance, they establish themselves and they grow. They invest huge amounts in their viability to produce seed and regenerate as quickly as possible. But they're annuals, and they flower for part of the year or grow for part of the year and then disappear. But then the more dominant plants will then use that foothold to re-establish themselves. And it's a cycle of about 14 years. Destroyed all the vegetation in this area. Just a few of these protea trees that are still barely surviving. Quite amazing that you...
Will they survive?
Surviving, actually. You see it got scorched, but you see the new growth over there. It's still viable, so it will survive. The situation like this where fire comes through and sweeps clean is not always negative. There's it makes way for new life. Nature has an incredible way of regenerating. Everything can be destroyed, and slowly but surely little seeds, especially of these pioneer plants, establish themselves and then begin a whole new process of life, mainly as anchors to support other plants that become more dominant climax plants later. And I guess, if one looks at life and looks at the success of humans, that does repeat itself in history. That you have these great empires that actually rise and then something causes them to crash. Be it war, be it environmental factors, disease, quite a few things. But life has this thing. It has this renewable energy. It comes from somewhere, and the problem is that us humans build this kind of get ourselves to this apex point where we are in control of our world, in control of everything, and it's actually a very fragile position to be in, because there's the cycle where nature has this way of building and destroying, and our civilizations are also as vulnerable as a situation like this. So
we might just be being part of nature now, what we do.
Well, the earth has this, and the greatest cities in the world are just as vulnerable. The foundations might be good, the structures and the construction might be great, but it doesn't take much. It can take an earthquake, it can take a flood or just a fire, or even man himself, to destroy all of that. So we kind of invest too much of our lives in building things of materialistic value, and we it's incredible to see how it looked very, very bleak a while ago, but it doesn't take long. With a bit of rain and a bit of time, everything grows back, and you come back here in a month's time, you're going to have such a spectacular flower show. Into this wonderful formation of land right at the tip of Africa here. We've got a place which is very unique, and I'll go into the detail of the plants later, but this is a situation where we have a dramatic coastline, with these mountains and seascape, and a little bay like False Bay is also once again a very fragile system. It's an incredible biodiversity of animals that exist in extreme conditions. During the summer months we have winds that blow into this bay here, bringing in warm water, And over the winter months, the wind blows in the opposite direction and blows all the warm water out of the bay. And we get pockets of what we call upwelling, where the surface water is blown away and then the deep nutrient-rich water comes up from below and replenishes that displaced water. And that brings with it the foundation of life for the ocean, which is all these organisms that have been dormant on the ocean floor. And as they get brought to the surface, where you have this, you see the rings of white along the edge of all this, the coastline is, that you're seeing there is actually a plankton bloom. So those organisms are brought into the oxygen-rich water and they suddenly burst into life. And that's the pyramid of, the lower part of the pyramid of life that supports this incredible fish reserve and marine biodiversity. So that would what we refer to as the plant version, the phytoplankton, the plant plankton. And then as that food drifts out into this area here, which is mainly the coastline is really made up of pretty cool water. You know, the average temperature is about 12 degrees. So it ranges from really, really cold sometimes to even below 10 degrees. And then it can rise up to about 20 degrees depending on the wind. But this area supports an incredible pelagic reserve of fish. And this plant plankton then eventually gets fed on by the zooplankton, which are the jellyfish and the floating component of plankton and a bit of krill and all that. And then the other group of fish which live off that, mainly filter feeding fish and anchovies and sardines and mackerel and all that, are then the next level. Great schools and concentrations of that exist off the Cape. Very, very fragile, what they call baitfish reserve. And that would then support the incredible game fish that seasonally exist off the coast here. So the problem is that it's all good and well that nature's supporting itself in a great balance until somebody comes along with a huge net and just trawls that entire pelagic shoal away. And the Cape is very vulnerable in that way. It's quite accessible to fishing vessels. I mean, there's good harbours and good technology, and very soon a fleet of trawlers could discover a shoal of fish. They use all sorts of methods of locating them these days. They use satellite technology. They're able to use they've got various sonars that aren't just like that don't just scan the ocean floor below the boat. They're able to use horizontal sonars where they're actually able to extend the range of the sonars way beyond the old traditional methods, so they can locate shoals of fish from far away and very strategically bring in a whole team of trawlers and actually take everything. So it is a big issue for us. It is one of the richest fishing grounds in the world. In terms of biodiversity, the South African coastline, which is 3,000 kilometers long, represents the second largest diversity of families of fish in the world. So from the very warm tropical coastline up in on the border of Mozambique, all the way to the really cold and rugged coastline of the border of Namibia. So it's a huge range. And within that range, you've got the pelagic fish, which are the ones that very much occur off this coastline, which live in the cold water, which is the Benguela current. And then on the east coast, we've got fish that are reef fish. So they're a bit more vulnerable in terms of exploitation, because they don't easily regenerate themselves. Because once a reef has been destroyed, it's very hard to kind of build the viability of that reef back again. But a place like False Bay, as I said, it's a place where we've got enormous number of fish that are able to withstand that range of temperatures, that are also very localized as it's some of the fish up on the tropical areas. And within this bay, we've got quite a number of fish that are endemic only to this area, mainly amongst what we refer to them as the little sand sharks, the smaller reef sharks. False Bay is unfortunately quite protected. They don't allow any trawling in the bay here, and the type of fishermen that operate in the area are mainly the traditional fishermen from Cork Bay, who are line fishermen, and a couple of sports anglers. But there are still, in the bay, there are a number of areas which are regarded as breeding sites for cob and for steenbras, and those areas are unfortunately still permit dragnet fishing. So quite often fish that come in to spawn and breed happen to fall within the range of these gill net or land-based net fishermen, and they actually trawl the whole group in and destroy that viable breeding population. But so False Bay is a spectacular area. Good part of it is fortunately protected, and this time of the year we have an incredible gathering of whales, mainly southern right whales, that congregate in these waters.
Impact of on the ground, on the bottom floor of the trawlers.
Well, trawlers don't really operate here, but on the other side of this reserve is an area which we refer to as the canyon area, where the water is particularly deeper than here. And it's kind of the kind of interface where you have the cold water and the warm water mixing, because although we have this cold Benguela current pushing up coming down the coast, pushing up the coast from the sub-Antarctic, we have a countercurrent that comes from the other side, and that countercurrent is usually warm water, and that's where all the predatory fish live. And then you have the bait fish within the colder water. Now that's an area that the trawlers target, because it supports quite a biodiversity of fish, mainly the hake and kingklip. The problem with the trawler is non-specific. They basically create this huge wall of net, and they just trawl everything within range of that. And it takes everything. There's a huge amount of bycatch. It doesn't quite scrape. Bycatch is non-target fish. It could be fish. It could be mammals. It could be dolphins. It could be anything that happens to be in the path of that net is taken. And those nets trawl for 3 hours. And once they pull it out, everything, the contents of that net gets dropped into a hold, and then it gets processed. So in the time of being trawled for 3 hours and then being thrown out of the water into this big cargo hold and then being processed, most of the animals don't survive. So what would happen then is the fishing company would just take out the viable fish, and the rest would just be thrown out the back. There are quite a few other techniques of fishing beyond, other than the trawling, is the long lining. And the long lining is a matter of having a long rope with multiple lines with hooks, which are baited, and it's also quite non-target, because they might be looking to catch what they call the normal lionfish by baiting for kingklip and for hake, but they catch quite a number of sharks in the process as well. And those fish don't survive. Other problem with that is the number of seabirds that actually attracted to this fishing operation. So you've got albatrosses, and you've got shearwaters, and all the incredible flocks of pelagic birds out there that actually follow these fishing vessels. And quite a few of them get dive as the ropes are recovered. The long liners, with each rope with its whole series of hooks, and the quite often albatrosses that actually get impaled on the hooks and brought out. So we lose a lot of albatrosses in the process of that. So talking about bycatch, these animals all suffer as a consequence of this fishing operation.
Some people would say that the effect of dropping so much dead fish that is just not the one that they wanted over the edge could mean a lot of food for other fish. Is this indeed what happens?
It is. It's one of the most. I mean, it's quite a significant thing to be around a boat that's pulling a net or lifting a long line, because it does attract everything. I mean, it's for a fisherman. If you're a tuna fisherman, it's probably one of the best places to catch a fish, because the predatory fish know this. They're conditioned already to know that when a trawler lifts a net, that there's going to be a reward or two. So do the birds. So they are. That's true. But the thing is that there's just so much they can eat, and the rest is just pure wastage. It's just a loss of unnecessary life. Man is polluting quite a few of these coastal areas with the sewage situations, and quite a few of the rivers in Cape Town that have been previously quite polluted have also had quite an effect on the estuaries and the coastline. But I think the bigger problem in the rock lobster industry is that they're using a very, very the method of catching lobsters utilizes what they call a trap, which is a huge basket-like box, which has got two funnels on either side. And the problem is that these fishermen often put these traps out on very, very bad weather days, because they're forced they have a pressure to catch a certain number of quota within a certain time frame. So they do expose themselves to some extreme conditions, and in the process lose these nets. And once this net is lost, it continues for almost infinity until that net actually disintegrates, continually catching everything through that funnel system. So they might have started out and had a trap full of crayfish, but those crayfish rot and attract other crayfish. So there's more destruction by them losing one of those nets than probably by them just fulfilling their quota. And if you go onto the western side of the peninsula, you'll just see beaches littered with those traps. I mean, I count up to about 30, 40 at the moment in the reserve. And just try and think back of when they might have lost that, and what a process of killing that net has gone through until it eventually found its way onto the beach. They should prevent operators from using those.
Man is impacting the planet everywhere, and one of the big problems that is happening is potentially with global warming. They're anticipating a man-induced heating of the planet, and thus rising the sea levels because of the melting ice. What impact would that have, in your opinion, on, can you sort of foresee how it might unwind up the process? Up goes the sea level, let's say, give it 2 meters. How will that change things for anybody, for anything?
Well, terrible things, and it has been.
Has it? Completely icebound, like a snowball.
Not completely locked up, and that's why the Cape is rather different from other areas, and that's why we have such a diverse vegetation type, because some parts of the world are relatively ice-free, even during that great chill. There are two schools. You obviously got the scientists that have their, we live in a society where everything is about finding a mechanism of survival, and even scientists have to find a mechanism of survival. And if they can come up with a good theory to support their situation as a scientist, then they're sustaining themselves. And if that theory is to promote the idea that we're going through a time of stress, that global warming is a major impact, then it does create a bit of a public hype, and it does get people on board to help them support their research, because it becomes then a sustainable opportunity for that scientist. And there are two schools. Somebody might have a different theory, and whoever puts the right theory together, because there are many explanations for these environmental effects. one can actually put it down to much more than just global warming. And it also depends on, like, you know, how people are lobbied, and how the political support kind of rallies around certain issues, and the way that they can get people on board to achieve their end. You know, there's a great amount of support for anything where one raises a level of fear amongst people. When their security is compromised, if their well-being is stressed, they will always find mechanisms to try and discount their stress situation on something, which is most often bigger issues like environment. And I think the environmental issues that they put out there, and the doom and gloom that they present, are sometimes a bit of a smokescreen for other things that are going down.
And yet, previous civilizations have become extinct, have basically gone down.
Well, I think a lot of that is human dynamics. Those extinctions would probably be effective of maybe a localized environmental factor, an extended drought, or a local flood, and I mean, those situations have existed in the past. It's not that the world hasn't had catastrophic environmental conditions. I mean, they have happened. We do have volcanoes erupting, having a huge effect on a much greater area than just the local one. I think it's more how man influences his local environment, and how they can try and keep a status quo of balancing nature and balancing human needs.
Project would work, where they would come and negotiate, because they'd have an agenda. They want to come in here and they want to start a AIDS orphanage or something like that. They would go to the chief and they'd say to the chief, we want to start up an AIDS orphanage, and we want to try and employ some people and educate some people, and we want to take care of all your AIDS orphans, and for that we want some land. And the chief would think about it seriously, and he would feel important and say, yes, it's a good idea, we need these things. And there would be this trade-off, but in a way the project would then be beheld to the chief, whereas we kind of came through the back door here. Firstly, because I came in here with a preconceived idea that this whole tribal system or traditional system was flawed anyway, and it failed. So I came in here with kind of really a judgment against this whole traditional system and things like that, you know, from what I'd heard, which is really unfair, but that's how I came in here. I sort of touched a little bit on what Contra Lesser, which is the Concrete Traditional Leaders, was all about, and it looked dodgy. In a sense, it was quite rude. I should have gone to the great place of this specific council and said, I'm here to do this. Another thing was, having worked in the Transkei before, worked in many other countries in Africa as well, is that you sort of also believe in the bush telegraph. And I sort of thought, well, what I'm doing, if it's important enough, then somebody will hear about it and they'll come and find me and say, let's meet, sort of thing, which didn't happen. So either the bush telephone didn't get there, or I just haven't been doing enough important stuff really at that level. So what that did for the project anyway was, I think, was quite beneficial in that journey of understanding what these problems are all about, because we didn't have to work to anybody's agenda, or had to deliver anything to anybody. While I was busy, not sure what I was really doing, just building this island in the middle of this place that I wasn't familiar with, having never been as close to the coast. I'd worked up in Ngcobo and places like that several years before. To put in a relatively self-sustainable place, and hoping that people would just be flocked and would just feel there's some kind of magnetic pull to this place, and we could teach people how to eat and to respect water and soil, and building and things like that, and get their houses stronger, which was really naive of me, I think, in hindsight. I think people are used to being herded in a way, and they just didn't. So they thought, in order to engage with me, they'd have to pay me In other words, if they want to come and make bricks, they'd have to pay me to do that, which was never in my mind, but I didn't articulate that very well, I think. So all this time I'm busy developing these gardens, I'm busy building these buildings, and sorting out these water issues and things like that. And at the same time, I'm watching it collapse around me on the greater scale. The municipality falling to pieces, the water systems falling to pieces, understanding how that's affected the whole dynamics of the community. Because I'm living inside this place and I'm seeing, I've done this before in other places in other parts of Africa, but never with such a social dysfunctionality, which is what we've got here. So watching people's buildings fall down, and not jumping in these things and trying to save everybody, but just saying, well, tough. You know, you don't, until you decide to integrate, it's what's going to happen. Of course, because whether it was a good thing or a bad thing, but this main chief who was head of Contra Lesu, who I was working with, died, and left this huge void suddenly that we had started, which was about leadership. And he completely saw things the way that I saw things, of understanding that present leadership was flawed, and had to be nurtured, and then to start focusing on the next leadership, the children, and to create leadership schools for these guys to come through so we can start to shift the whole thing around. Everything is based on oil.
Yeah.
Our monetary system, our judicial system, our education systems, everything on this table. Well, this is now second generation, so that's now no longer oil required. But that's our existence. Oil comes crash. I mean, we see it. I mean, yesterday, the Dow Jones fell another 3.5% yesterday. You know, you look across the board in the American markets, it's just red. They just crashed. Oil organizations went down 4 to 5%. They're just coming crashing down, and it's happening every day. They're totally overinflated because they're based on where they think the oil reserves are, not where the oil, because everybody's overselling their oil. They're saying, oh no, we've got loads of it still, because they don't want to create panic. We're into these long wars now. I mean, when you've got a country like America that's a net importer of oil, I mean, they produce, I think, about 2 to 3, not even 2% probably anymore, of the world's oil. But they use 25% of the world's oil. I mean, they have to control the world. The economy is based on it. They have to control the world's oil, which means they have to be in war. So that's what's going to go on. I mean, it's not going to stop. The only thing that's going to stop it, when there's no more oil to put in the ship, the HSS Indomitable or whatever it's called, to get it across the ocean anymore, that's when it's all going to come grinding to a halt. So we go back to this governance you're talking about. It's all based on central control. But what happens when that central control is broken? The most recent example of that happening was when Katrina went into New Orleans. And it cut off, in a first world country, okay, it cut off Washington, D.C. And within hours, people turned on people. Shops were pillaged. Next thing, people just turned on people. Okay, and that's what happens when there's chaos, when there's no more control, there's no one. So now, in a third world or developing country, when suddenly that power line is cut, it's going to be mayhem. Unless we can shift it, and we can get people and communities, let's call them transition, whatever we want to call them, all these words have been banning around, where they are taking care of themselves. Where they're not reliant upon the central system of control, which is money. And so there's something that's gone. You see, in our conditioning, and we are so conditioned, we have become codependent, where we depend upon each other. And this is really it's a disease. If we use which I do often, I use an analogy of a forest. And we see these forests where they're codependent, where the trees cross over each other and they stop the flow of air through each other, and they stop the growth. And we've seen it here. There's so much evasive stuff comes in. But if you look at a forest that each tree stands strong on its own, and then as a collective, it's incredibly strong. It's a strong, healthy environment. And it's a three-dimensional living thing then. And if we can create that where people can stand strong on their own as individuals and then as a community, they're really, really strong. And they do things out of free will. Then we can shift the consciousness. But that goes against the religious beliefs, because that's all about codependency. I mean, goodness, it's so disempowering. It's very, there's this fellow who died for my sins. For goodness sakes, I'll die for my own sins. It's very disempowering, and that's where it starts. And it's been so successful. It's indoctrinated in this. In these areas that I am in. This religion that's used here now, several versions of Christianity that are all over these areas that I'm in here. Unbelievable, the fear and the obsession with death and the amount of resources that get put into death and this dignity in death. But where's the dignity in life? And that's what we need to be focusing on. Is that every moment that we have this gift of living, and let's make it count. Let's be authentic. But we all put our belief in old mutual and funeral schemes for our death, so we can be remembered. But these guys who have they throw these huge parties. They spent their life beating their wives, abusing their children. But they had this incredible funeral, man. It was huge. You should have seen it. Strong Muti there. No. Disgraceful. Let's put that dignity into life now. And I really do believe that in this religion that existed before we came along with this whole sort of Christianity trip and things like that, was this incredible dynamic relationship between the earth and the people in Africa. They call it Kwamata or something like that. And it's brilliant. It's so naive. It's brilliant. It's got counterbalance. It's just based in love and respect. And if you respect the sun for rising, for setting, you respect the seasons, you show respect to the animal you kill to nurture yourself. You respect your spouse or your kids, Suddenly, here come these guys and saying, "Oh, hold on, you guys are savages unless you bow down to this figure here. That's it. You're going to go and die a miserable death in hell and things like it." And how could people come here with anything but love anyway? Because that's all we believe in is love. Okay, so this is how people are building here. People without much means, which is called a wattle and daub. So here you've got your wattle, which is your wooden framework, and they're packing in the daub, which is the clay, in here. Now, historically, this is a brilliant way to build. A lot of your Tudor houses in the United Kingdom, which have quite adverse weather, use this system. Okay, and they've lasted for hundreds and hundreds of years. This house won't last a year. Okay, and they have to redo it. What I'd like to propose that the way that this has been mixed, the way it's been mixed in, there's not much intention going into this. It shows a victim mentality within the people, because if this clay was worked through properly, in other words, it was kneaded like you knead bread, and they put a bit of some dry grass in it, or some millie husks and things like that into it, it would create a stronger integrity in the bond, and it would last for years and years and years. But this has really just been put together very loosely, and with not much love goes into this wall. And that's why we're using cements and things like that, because it's practical and it gives it longevity. Now, if you go into some of your sort of Central American, Santa Fe, those sort of areas, for them, which they use the adobe blocks, which is also just sort of sun-dried bricks, clay bricks. For them to come once a year, and the woman would come and they would repair the cracks, because they're also in very adverse dry conditions, where the bricks create wonderful insulation for their homes. It works really nicely for them. But for them, it's part of their cultural heritage. They celebrate the renewal every year, where they would fix up their cracks, that make big clay pits and create a render. That's part of who they are, and their yearly existence, their yearly rebirthing. Yeah, this is clay which we've got locally here. Now, it's quite a strong clay actually, prone to cracking, but it could be worked through a lot better. And fill this with your mix. Okay, with a very little bit amount of water, and then you'll put this on it, and you'll push it down, which is your primary compaction. All right. Then take that over, and then this is where you'll notice the bottom is coming up.
Yes.
So it's compacting from the bottom. So there's your compaction. Alright, so it's compacting up. Up it goes, and it pops the brick out, which should be up there now. 2 people could make a brick every 17 seconds.
Yeah.
But you get machines now that can do 12 bricks at once, doing the same. But the nice thing about it is that, as opposed to the machines that can make 1,500 bricks a day, there's a huge effect on the environment. Where you're actually getting, I mean, that's a hungry machine, and where you're getting that material from. Whereas this here, it's more heavy. You can use the foundations of your building to build the walls up. It doesn't have to have such a negative effect on the environment. They're not fully set yet, so I don't want to mess with them too much. So it's 240 mils long, and it's 100 high, and it's 140 wide, which from an engineering perspective is perfect for a wall. You can support a roof with this lightweight roof, and it'll be fine. This is going to set for about 3 weeks. This digester, which I designed, it's a closed bag. Well, it's got an inlet and an outlet and a gas outlet. So it's made from reinforced PVC, which is the same material as you'll make a jumping castle from, and it's shaped. The shape of it is like a loaf of bread. It's risen, so it has the convex top on it, and everything else is squared. And it fits into this frame here that I just built with brick. And how it works is that it comes from the toilets. The waste comes into the I can also feed it with green material, which produces most of. If I really want to get a lot of push my my methane levels up, I'll feed it with some bananas or stuff like that, which boosts it. It comes in here, and inside here I have a live culture, which is anaerobic, which means that it exists without oxygen. Okay, so it's the digestion process is anaerobic as opposed to aerobic, which is like your composting loos and things like this. So the microbes that exist inside here break down the waste very, very efficiently, and the energy that comes out of that is the methane gas. Now, if you can smell, Judy, which it's almost a composty smell. There's not necessarily a sewage smell, but there's a slight composty smell. If you come close down here, you could almost smell. You could smell the gas as well, which is when you burn it, there's no smell whatsoever. Again, it's a composty one. It's not necessarily unpleasant. We'll fill this with green material, with anything, and we'll just get some water and shove it down. It's a big stomach. That's how it really works. There's the enzymes that are breaking down the material inside there, and from that they create methane gas, and they create high nutrient water. Now there have been sort of many household biodigestion systems that are coming out. There are about 6 cubic meters prefabricated systems that cost probably about 40,000 rands, and they're not high gas yielding, but what they are doing is they're breaking down the water, the black water, the effluent water, which is really critical. And so therefore the principles are very much along these lines. This is just a bit more rudimentary. And so from here the water will go through a sand filter, which is what this is, which we've got. Obviously there's high nutrients in here. We've still got about 5 to 7% pathogens, which is your E. coli, etc., coming into here, which then these plant life will take it out. So it'll come into here, it will filtrate down through a slow sand filter. Underneath here, about a meter down, there's a hole, and it'll come up here, which this is full of shells like this, and charcoal, which then absorb the last remnants of pathogens. Okay, that's what this one, and the reeds of course as well, take out anything. So it's we really have removed as much. I mean, if there's anything left, it's absolute trace elements. The water will gather in here and settle, and then will slowly gravitate down through our trees and our orchards, which are down that side, which is high nutrient water, which you can drink. It'll give you a bit of a stomach ache because it's high in nutrients, but certainly nothing poisonous. And but it's very good for growth of the trees and plants. We've got coffee trees down there and a loquat tree, and we're definitely seeing pronounced growth as to the other trees that we have around here that are not enjoying these high nutrients that we're getting out of here. So ultimately what you'd like to have is say 3 or 4 houses together, all the waste leading into a digester, which then would lead into an orchard, oranges or whatever, which would then go to provide food for that house, provide the energy for the gas, as well as, most importantly in my mind, is processing the black water and not getting it into the waterways, which is critical. So we've got our dam over there where the water collects. All right, it's about 120,000 litres of water. We've got our fish inside there as well, which is a source of protein. And we feed the garden with that water as well, which then all slopes back into the dam slowly. From there the water is pumped up through to the storage tank, but it goes through a filtration process first, and then we can put in a solar pump to pump it up to our it's a 5,000 litre storage tank. The water is then, there's pipes going around down into the kitchen. From the kitchen it's processed through the food. The food is then processed through our bodies, which is then to the toilet, which then comes down through the digester, through the filtration, back into the gardens, and ultimately back into the dam. And it's a closed cycle, which we have now interrupted. We've taken from it, but now we've also put back the byproduct, which has helped our plant life growth, and it's given us energy. We're obviously going through transition now into winter, so we're getting our celeries going, our beetroots, carrots, things like that, lettuces, which this is quite a warm climate, so the lettuces don't always do that well in the hotter climates. We also do have some shade houses here as well to protect them through the summer. And what we're trying to do here is create a food forest where we've got our trees going, we've got bananas trees there, citrus trees going, we've got nut trees, avocado trees, pawpaws, as well as guava and coffee. We've got about 350 coffee trees in this space as well, which has got about another 3 years to go before they start producing. And then we've got climbing beans all over the place, which we're getting a huge amount of food from, plus our loofahs, which we eat when they're still young. And then we've got our pigeon peas as well, plus all our herbs and that. And then we go all the way down where we've got our ground covers. This is what we can call an aerated bed. It's off the ground. We've got green material at the very bottom, which is composting, and then we've got which is a long nutrient release bed, which is like a double dug bed, and then above it we've got layers where we've got decomposing materials at various stages, plus cow manure. That's very rich if you look at that. If we look around here, of course, sod's law, we won't find any, but there's worms everywhere as well that are working away. Perhaps if we look in one of the other ones. And then we cover that all up. Right now, because it's winter, we have quite a bit of dew, and this mulch here is holding that water, because we're in drought now, is holding that water on the ground. Plus the kind of growth here, we've got corianders and cresses, which are low on the ground and not using up too much of the precious nutrients. But this is where we have problems, where we have invasive plants like this guavadilla, which just comes on and takes over.
But it does produce fruit that you eat.
It produces fruit, but it stops the oxygen from getting to these plants. So this needs to be managed a bit. In this garden here, we've got not just fruit that's for eating, but it's to attract other insects that eat aphids and things like that, like the marigold, which the scent, some of these invasive pests don't like the smell of, and it attracts other ones which then also eat other pests. So it's a very strong deterrent for an organic garden. There's a certain amount of weeds in here as well. If we look here, these are some weeds growing there. We allow that. We share the garden. We've got nice cloves growing as well, which is really good. On the sides here, we got roots creating networks, holding everything inside here. In this one here, we got mints, and we got some gooseberries over there. It smells lovely. If you're into that, and we can also put strawberries in some gardens at the bottom there. We've got strawberries holding the whole thing together. So we've got garden and garden. Yeah, peanuts here, which are coming good soon. In about 2 weeks' time we can harvest these. And carrots are coming right as well now. The seeds there, the marigolds are now going to seed, which I'll just
To conclude, I think what we can show in the Nordic cities is that we can have a strong political commitment for this transformation, and that is also a really important message to other cities around in the world. Also that we have good financial basic, and that is one of the issues also here in Paris. We need a financial solutions for cities, otherwise the infrastructure will not be the right one for the next 10 years, where a lot of cities will increase rapidly. But stakeholder involvement is key, and we have to work with new partnership models, public-private innovation, for example, but also having some common business plans together with develop that together with business and universities. And finally, and not least, a lot of communication about what we're doing, sharing our knowledge with cities and citizens in what for the implementation of that is really key. Thank you.
Copenhagen and Stockholm are one of the first 10 cities full members of the Compact of Mayors, which of course we are very proud of, and but it's also an example of what we do. Stockholm are one of Europe's fastest growing cities right now. We are growing by about between 15 and 20,000. Half are coming from the hospital, it's newborn babies, and the other half is coming from is immigration. And right now, as you perhaps know, Sweden and Stockholm as well are facing a very serious situation when it comes to immigrants. We have never seen anything like it, and the capacity to take care of everybody who wants to come to Sweden is over the edge and over the capacity. But we think the master plan is to create a dense city, and we think that it's also a sustainable city. So we want to use the facilities for public transit and biking. It's a shift in transport mode in Stockholm. And so also a different attitude among the public. When I started to work in the city hall 25 years ago, most people thought that Stockholm shouldn't grow. Today we want to grow, and it's a political consensus both that we want to grow, but also about the environment and sustainability. My mayor from the Green Party is not here, but there is nowadays very little difference between the conservative side and the left-wing side. We have a left-wing majority in the city hall, but we right now, since a year back, that we have had 8 years of a conservative coalition, and basically it's a total different compared to the situation 10 years ago. What we are measuring here is heating, electricity and transport. Of course we are aware about the consumption and the goods, but we have the same conclusion as you. It's almost impossible to measure it, and we don't want to ruin our statistics. We still want to do what we can do in the city, and no matter what will happen in this conference, what happened in Copenhagen 5 years ago, and we still want to do what we can to minimize our carbon dioxide emissions. So we have gone from 5.3 tons in 1990. We are right now down at somewhere 2.8, perhaps 2.6, 2.7, because we have rather warm winters. And the next goal is to be down to 2.3 tons in 2020 and to be a totally fossil fuel-free city. This is more complicated. I know that you want to be a climate neutral city and the first capital being climate neutral in 2025, but to be a fossil fuel-free city is to have no fossil or carbon dioxide emissions at all. So what we are now planning for, how to get rid of the plastic in the incineration plants, for example, how do we control the car traffic? That is the biggest challenge that we have in Stockholm. And as you can see, we're down at about 2.5 million tons CO2 emissions. We have lowering it in the emissions in the city by a million million tons CO2 emissions since the last 15 years. And the blue line here is heating, and this is electricity, and that is car traffic and transport. And we think that we will be totally fossil-free heating in 2030, somewhere between 2025 and 2030. It's a discussion to perhaps be it already in 2020, but that would be extremely expensive and we don't control our energy company. For the heating company, where half is owned by the Finnish company Fortum, which is owned by the Finnish state, basically. And electricity, we are calculating the Nordic mix here. If you're then Swedish electricity, almost fossil-free. It's half is hydropower, 40% is nuclear power, and the rest is wind, some solar, and some combination of the in the district heating systems. The big challenge is the traffic. How can we ensure that the car driving in Stockholm, and half of all car driving in Stockholm is not Stockholmers, they're coming outside from the neighbor municipalities in the region of Stockholm, but how can we control them so they don't use fossil fuels? And that is a challenge. We don't have the legal access to every measurements that we need in action, but that is what we want to do. I use this is the old king, our present king, which is Gustav II Adolf, is the present king's grandpa, and the king will be here tomorrow, I think, but here is inaugurating the combination when we combine the Southern Metro line with the Western Metro line. And the interesting thing, we are lucky in Stockholm to have very foreseen politicians. They planned metro stations to places where no one lived because they had the inner vision of the growing city. And the environmental work and the climate work have brought back the long-term perspective. What we are facing in Stockholm as one of the biggest challenge is the sea level rise of the Baltic Sea, because if the Baltic Sea flood into the big Lake Mälaren, we have no fresh water. This is Hammarby waterfront. It's one of the first and most well-known eco-districts in the world. But here was the aim to reduce the environmental impact by 50%. Almost succeeded, but the experiences from here, we took it to the next district that we will reduce the environmental impact by another 50%. Here we have a very tough energy performance request. We own the land, the city of Stockholm own the land, and there is a number of private developers, about 25 to 30 developers, who are building up 10,000 new apartments in a new green residential district in the north inner city of Stockholm. in Stockholm, and I think as in Copenhagen and Oslo, we have a green market-driven situation. This is an example where it's not so much of new technology, but it's a new thinking. This building is the head office for two big newspapers in Stockholm, the Svenska Dagbladet and Aftonbladet, and they are it's heated by the heat surplus from the central station that used to be ventilated out. Now it's in use. It's cold from the water outside, and it's an example of that private developers and private construction companies are competing to be the greenest in Stockholm. We also have the district heating. We have the market share is a little bit more than 80%, but this is also the third party interest that innovate, that we are now analyzing what sources are there from computer centers that could be used to feed the district heating system, and the district heating system will be almost fossil-free. It will be fossil-free in 2030 at latest, I would say. But we're using new sources and trying to develop energy that it's already made, and instead of ventilate out the heat surplus from different offices or computer centers, etc., we try to use it. The same thing with the district cooling. Instead of using electricity, we use the water to cool our buildings. And this is also the contributor to the better air quality. Stockholm has 100 times better air quality today than we had 50 years ago when I was a kid in the city of Stockholm. Congestion charges is one of the most well-known infrastructure project in Stockholm. It was introduced in 2006 after huge opposition from the Stockholmers. Now everyone it's a consensus. We will increase the price by 75% from the 1st of January 2016, and there is no opposition. Everyone knows it, but it's fully accepted as a tool, and the traffic level has been remained reduction compared to 2005, but reasonably 25%, and despite the fact that we now are 100,000 more people in the region and 200,000 more people in the region and 100,000 in the city, and no increase of car traffic. It's traffic not simply because we don't have the road space anymore, and we are reserving the big roads for public transit and bikers. And we are now having heavily investment program in new metro lines, one up in the north, one to the east, one small extension in the northwest, and a new southern metro line, just to make people to manage the transport. We also try to increase the infrastructure for electrical cars. We think it will explode on the market in the 5 years, but we don't control it by ourselves, but we need to get the price down, and we don't have the same situation as you have in Norway, where an electrical car is about the same price as a normal car. But we have, for 20 years, we have been run a clean car project in Stockholm, and Stockholmers want to buy clean cars. So more than 20%, almost 25% is cars that emitted less than 95 gram. But 2040 it will be 0 gram CO2 emission. And so what we are working with is the heavy traffic, and we have been running different EU projects to promote clean truck in Stockholm and in Europe as well. And we work together with the business community with the climate agreement. It started 2007 with 5 companies, and now it's 170 different companies want to take part in a greener and Stockholm and to reduce and help the city to achieve our climate goals. And this is the broadband net of Stockholm, the city-owned company called Stokab. That's Europe's biggest fiber net, and that will help us to reduce it. We are now using the technology and ICT development as a tool in the climate combat. And the Stockholmers are behind us. 90% of the Stockholmers think it's very good that we have high ambitions. And people also accept that we put a demand on the household to reduce their CO2 emissions and to adopt a more sustainable lifestyle. And we have tremendous success when we have cookbook of sustainability, climate cookbook, which have been a success in Stockholm. So we have already decided to be fossil fuel free 2050. Now it's already in 2040. It will be it's almost finished in the proposal for the city council, but it will be a consultation on that. So somewhere in May, June, we will see the city council decide on the roadmap for 2040. Thank you very much.
It's my pleasure to be here in Paris today, and I'm very glad that I have the opportunity to briefly explain you Helsinki Climate Roadmap that we recently finalized in Helsinki. In Helsinki we have a target of being carbon neutral and climate resilient by 2050, so a little bit more slowly than Copenhagen and Stockholm. Waste has an almost minimal impact in this respect. Households are the main source of greenhouse emissions. Over 50%. Traffic is number, or services and workplaces is number 2 in this, and we have relatively little industry in Helsinki. Only 10% of the emissions are produced by industry. The city's own services and buildings and public transport is causing only 8% of emissions, which is relatively small amount. So we have to have an effective impact on the other private citizens, for example. They have to come into this work in order that Helsinki can reduce greenhouse emissions in an effective way. Here are the emissions and scenarios. The red line is emissions in tons per capita, and blue line is the emissions, the total emissions. The difference is due to the relatively rapid increase in inhabitants in Helsinki. We are also growing, as we heard, is the case in Copenhagen and Stockholm. We have got about 100 inhabitants more compared to year 1990. Now we are about 600,000. And if you think about year 2050, we are expecting to have 260,000 inhabitants more in Helsinki, which is about 40% increase in the present figures. We have had about 23% decrease in total emissions compared to year 1990, and almost 40% if you calculate that per capita. So the direction is good, but there is still a lot of work to be done, of course. Last spring we published Helsinki Climate Roadmap. I took a couple of them with me. I don't know where they disappeared, but there was about 50 examples of this. There we try to explain to politicians and also to general public what could each individual do in order to minimize our climate footprint. There are many practical advice and also we have collected all the things that Helsinki City has been doing during the past years. We found some 800 different projects and different decisions that had an impact on climate change, and we kind of put them together to this climate roadmap. As I mentioned, we want to be carbon neutral by 2050, and emissions from the city area should be diminished by 30% by year 2020, and we have almost reached that target. Also emissions from energy production reduction with 20%, that has already almost been reached. Okay, our vision for 2050 is that we want to have a new climate-friendly modes of business, and we want to have also a green environment that promotes the health and well-being of residents. That's not a very easy task as the city is growing so fast, but I think that our city planning is doing a very good work in this respect. And we want that energy would be produced in a carbon neutral way, and that we would have the world's best energy efficiency. We are also doing quite many projects with rain and meltwater, how to treat them, how they could be used in parks and gardens, and so that they wouldn't go to the wastewater treatment plants. And we are aiming at a dense urban structure, and that of course helps us in generating low transportation emissions in Helsinki. Some ongoing energy saving projects. We have a so-called energy renaissance in suburbs. We have a lot of buildings that have been built in 50s and 60s, and now they are about to need some renovation. And we want to increase the energy efficiency of this building in a significant way. We have also published some let's say, practical guidance how to do it, and also some possibilities how to get finance for this work. Yes, of course we have several advisory services and campaigns in this respect. And what comes to our own buildings, city buildings, we aim at nearly zero energy guidelines. For example, the building of Helsinki Environment Center, in which I work, is now carbon free this year, and it's the most energy efficient building of Finland actually, even it's already 4 years old, and I think that's a pity. I would like that someone would be better, but no one has done that so far. Yes, Helsinki is producing now heat and power in a very efficient way, as it combines production of electricity, production of heat, and also cooling. And this system saves about 40% of fuels compared to normal system. We are increasing slowly the use of renewable energy sources. It's now only 7%, but it's going to be 20 by 2020. Actually, probably tomorrow a very important decision will be made in this respect. The city council will probably decide to close our biggest energy plant, Hanasaari, and that means that use of coal in Helsinki will decrease by 2/3. So a big difference, but decision will be made tomorrow, so I can't be happy this is the case, but I'm almost 100% sure that this will be the decision. Yeah. One simple example is Katrivala heating and cooling plant, which is the biggest plant in the world of this kind. It uses the waste energy from the wastewater of Helsinki. It takes the heat out from it, and sometimes during summer, if it's very hot in Helsinki, that can also sometimes happen, that then this can be used vice versa, so that it gives cooling energy to the city. It's about 80% more energy efficient than let's say normal plants would be. We are going to have guidelines for locating wind power in the city area. We had a study that showed that most people want to have more wind power in the city, and that's what is going to happen in Helsinki as well. We try to adapt to increasing rainfall and flooding, and of course the methodologies, requirements and guidance for more energy efficient buildings are being created. We'll try to create a global reference area for smart and clean solutions, and there we have quite a good collaboration between cities, businesses and government. This project was launched in March this year, and now we have already some 80 companies, big companies or universities, research institutes there, and they have done some 150 say agreement on what they are going to do in this respect. And of course mobility issues, building and water supply, energy efficiency, consumer and clean tech are subject of this kind of picture of every single house of Helsinki, and you can see whether your house is losing energy from rooftop, and compare it to your neighbor if you want to. And also the similar exercise was made of the solar potential of the rooftops, that every single person in Helsinki can look how his or her apartment is doing in this respect, whether to put solar panels on the roof or not. Ongoing in mobility, city tolling is a high, let's say, political issue or hot political issue, but I'm sure that we are moving to that direction. We are doing a lot of work concerning the mobility as a service. We want to increase walking and biking. I, for example, bike every day to my work, but it's very far from the Copenhagen figures that it's. I would like to have same situation in Helsinki as well.
Now, with response to the political will, no, I don't think we're quite there yet. But I think since we last met at such an event, I think we have seen an awful lot of sensitisation. And I think the media exposés have put it on the agenda at levels it's not hitherto been. We can only hope that it carries on. I believe that the cooperation which has been shown in some of the famous cases and the recent arrests indicates that it is moving forward much quicker than I would have thought it would do.
One of the specific question that I have, and in a way it's a question to the whole audience, is do we have the necessary political will to do something on the criminal issues of this problem? Now, on IUU fishing, there's a lot of political statements through the African Union and different regional organizations, European Union, probably in ASEAN as well. I would think that they have different statements on IUU, but we are lacking similar statements on these issues, the criminal issues of this problem. So my question is, do we have enough political will and understanding of the problem that we are discussing here to move this forward? Thank you.
We had the possibility at one stage that the fund might land somewhere in Durban or Cape Town. If we had a laser provision, we would have been able to arrest immediately and take action in South Africa. Just an example of what the laser provision can do. And then the third maybe suggestion, question, if Marcus can maybe quickly react to it. If we bring in a laser provision, why is the laser provision, why must we limit it to saying fish products or wildlife products coming that was harvested in contravention of the laws of another country? Why not say any fish that was harvested in contravention of the laws of another country or in contravention of any international or regional fisheries agreement? Then you make it even wider and more effective.
You know, it may actually do that, and I used a shorthand. There's a whole set of action verbs and nouns in the Lacey Act, and so I went right to the issue of something's harvested, but it's something like harvested, transported, exported, you know, and a whole big set of action verbs, and then the list of underlying laws that you violate include laws and regulations, and it may include U.S. treaties as well. So I believe, for example, CAMLAR would count, but you don't hold me to that.
Another very, very useful thing with the post-state control regime, which I use very often whenever confronted with any kind of suspicion of any kind of illegal activities on behalf of the post-state control regime, which I use very often whenever confronted with any kind of suspicion of any kind of illegal activities on behalf of a reefer vessel, is that the information about these vessels that have been detained is very easily available on the internet. Each MOU provides you with a list, and so whenever I have some concern about the vessel, I'm thinking, okay, let's check this out. What is the profile of this vessel? And sure enough, there I can find every single port that this vessel has been inspected in, whether there has been any deficiencies reported, within what amount of time has been fixed, and so forth. And when you see